The night I buried her was the night I stopped believing in second chances. 7 years ago, I stood in the rain, watching them lower Emily Carter into the ground, and I told myself something simple. People like me don't get to keep the things they love. I remember the way the sky looked that day, heavy and gray, like it knew something I didn't. I remember thinking if I stayed long enough, if I waited, she might open her eyes and prove me wrong. She didn't. So I walked away, built walls, built an empire, became the kind of man who doesn't look back. That was the rule. Until tonight. The scream cut through the city noise before I saw her. High-pitched, desperate, wrong. I was stepping out of the car when it hit me, slicing through the quiet authority of the street like something that didn't belong in my world. My men froze, waiting for a signal, but I was already moving. Not fast. I don't run. I never run. But something about that sound pulled at me in a way I couldn't explain. The alley was dim, lit only by a flickering streetlight that buzzed like it was about to give up. That's where I saw her. Small. Maybe 6, 7 years old. Standing there like she'd taken a wrong turn into a story she wasn't supposed to be part of. Her shoes were wet. Her hands shaking. She looked at me like I was the last option she had left. "Please," she said, her voice barely holding together. "Help me." I've heard people beg before. Grown men. Powerful men. They all sound the same in the end. But this was different. This wasn't fear of losing power. This was fear of losing everything. I should have walked away. That's what men like me do. We don't get involved in things that don't serve us. We don't answer to strangers in the dark. But I didn't move. I couldn't. Because then she looked up. And the world just stopped. It wasn't dramatic. No thunder. No sudden realization crashing down. It was quieter than that. More dangerous. The kind of silence that settles into your bones and refuses to leave. Her eyes met mine, and something inside me shifted in a way I hadn't felt in years. Familiar. Impossible. I took a step closer without thinking. My men behind me stayed perfectly still. They knew better than to speak when I didn't understand my own thoughts. "What's your name?" I asked, my voice lower than usual, controlled, but not as cold as it should have been. She hesitated, like she'd been taught not to trust anyone who looked like me. "Smart girl." "Lily," she whispered. Lily. The name didn't mean anything. But her face, her eyes, the way she looked at me like she was trying to decide if I was safe or dangerous, it did something I couldn't explain. I exhaled slowly, trying to steady something that had no business being unsteady. "Where is your mother?" I asked. And when she answered, everything I thought I knew about the past, about Emily, about that night 7 years ago, started to fall apart. "She told me to run," Lily said softly. "She said if anything happened, I had to find someone strong." Her voice cracked just enough to make something tighten in my chest. Then she looked at me again. Really looked this time. And I realized something that didn't make sense. Not yet. Not fully. But enough to make me understand one thing clearly. This wasn't a coincidence. And for the first time in a long time, I had no idea what to do next. I have spent years building a life where nothing surprises me, where every move is calculated and every outcome anticipated. But standing there in that dim alley with a little girl looking at me like I was her last chance, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Uncertainty, real and sharp, like a crack forming in something I thought was unbreakable. And I did not like it, not even a little. "Who told you to run, Lily?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, controlled, the way it always was when people expected answers from me. But she shook her head, her small fingers curling into the fabric of her jacket, as if holding onto it would keep her from falling apart. "My mom," she said, barely above a whisper. "She said if I stayed, they would find me." The words settled in the air between us, heavy in a way I could not explain. And something about the way she said them, the quiet certainty, the fear she was trying so hard to hide, made it clear this was not a child imagining danger. This was a child who had already seen too much. I exhaled slowly, glancing over my shoulder for a brief second. My men still stood where I left them, silent, waiting, disciplined. They did not question me. They never did. But I could feel their attention sharpen. They could sense the shift even if they did not understand it. "Did she say where she was going?" I asked, stepping a little closer, not enough to scare her, just enough to see her face more clearly under the flickering light. And that was when it hit me again, that same impossible familiarity, not just in her eyes but in the shape of her expression, The way she held her fear back instead of letting it spill over, like she had learned early that showing weakness was dangerous, like someone had taught her that lesson the hard way. She said I had to hide, Lily answered, her voice trembling. Now, despite her effort to stay strong, she said I had to find someone powerful, someone who could keep me safe. Her gaze lifted to meet mine again, searching, uncertain, like she was trying to decide if I was that person or the exact opposite. And I felt something shift again, deeper this time, something that had no place in my world. I should have dismissed her, handed her off to someone else, made it someone else's problem. That would have been the smart move, the safe move, but I did not. Instead, I crouched down slightly, lowering myself just enough so I was not towering over her, so she would not feel like she was being cornered. And you think that is me? I asked quietly, and she hesitated, biting her lip for a second before answering. I do not know, she admitted, honest in a way most people never are with me. But you do not look scared. That almost made me laugh. Almost, because fear had never been something people associated with me. Not anymore. I straightened slowly, my mind already moving, already connecting pieces that did not quite fit yet. But we're getting closer to something dangerous, something real. We are leaving, I said, my voice returning to its usual edge as I turned toward my men. They moved instantly, opening the car doors, clearing the area without a single unnecessary word. Efficient, precise, the way everything in my world was supposed to be. Except this, nothing about this felt controlled. Not the girl, not the name she had not fully given me yet, not the echo of a past I had buried 7 years ago. I looked back at her one more time, at Lily, standing there in the dim light, waiting for me to decide what she was worth, and I realized something I had not expected. I was not deciding whether to help her. I had already made that decision the moment she looked at me. I was deciding how far I was willing to go, and that was a much more dangerous question. I extended my hand, not forcing, just offering. You are coming with me, I said, and for the first time in years, the words did not feel like control. They felt like a promise I did not fully understand yet. The car door closed with a soft, controlled sound that felt louder than it should have, like it marked a point of no return, and for a moment I stood there watching her through the open frame, waiting to see if she would hesitate, if she would pull back, if instinct would tell her that stepping into my world came with a cost she could not yet understand. But Lily did not move away. She looked at my hand, then at my face, and after a second that stretched longer than it should have, she placed her small fingers into mine. And just like that, the decision was made, not by me, not entirely, but by something neither of us could see yet, something already set in motion long before tonight. I guided her into the back seat, my men closing ranks without a word, the engine starting smoothly as the car pulled away from the alley and back into the quiet rhythm of the city. Streetlights passing in steady intervals like a metronome, counting down to something I could not quite name. She sat close to the door at first, shoulders tense, eyes moving constantly, taking everything in, calculating in a way that did not belong to someone her age. And I recognized that look. I had seen it in mirrors years ago. You are safe here, I said, not because I needed to reassure her, but because I needed to hear the words out loud, needed to test if they still meant anything coming from me. She glanced at me, uncertain. My mom said nowhere is safe, she replied quietly, and there it was again, that echo of someone I used to know, someone who used to challenge every certainty I had with simple truths I did not want to hear. I leaned back slightly, studying her more carefully now, the curve of her features, the way her expression shifted when she thought no one was looking. It was not just familiarity anymore, it was alignment, pieces sliding into place in a pattern that felt too precise to ignore. Your mother, I said slowly, choosing each word with care. What is her name? Lily hesitated again, her fingers tightening slightly in the fabric of her sleeve, like she had been told this question would come, like she had been warned about answering it. And for a second I saw the conflict in her eyes, fear against trust, instinct against exhaustion. Emily, she said finally, her voice softer than before. Emily Carter. The name did not hit me like a shock. It did something worse. It settled, deep and heavy, like something falling exactly where it was always meant to land, confirming what I had not allowed myself to consider until now. The car felt smaller suddenly, the air tighter, and I looked away for a brief second, out the window, at the passing lights that blurred together into something indistinct. Because if I kept looking at her, if I kept seeing the resemblance that was no longer just a coincidence, I would have to face a truth I had buried for 7 years. She told you to find someone strong, I said, my voice quieter now, less controlled than I would have liked. Why? Lily shifted slightly, pulling her knees closer, like she was trying to make herself smaller, safer. Because she said they would not stop, she answered, her words careful, measured. She said they would keep looking until they found us, and she could not protect me anymore. I felt something tighten in my chest at that. Not anger, not yet, something colder, more precise, the kind of focus that comes before decisions are made, before lines are drawn. Did she say who they are? I asked. And Lily shook her head. No, she just said I had to trust the right person. Her eyes lifted to meet mine again, searching for something she was not sure she would find. And I think she meant you. That should not have been possible, not after everything, not after the way things ended, not after I stood at a grave and accepted that there were no more answers left to find. And yet here she was, sitting in my car, speaking her name like it had never been buried, like the past had simply been waiting for the right moment to return. I looked at her for a long second, really looked this time, not as a problem to solve or a situation to control, but as something else. Entirely, something that carried answers I was not ready for, and I realized with a clarity that left no room for denial. This was not a coincidence. This was a message, and I had no choice but to listen. The moment the car crossed the bridge into my territory, everything became quieter, controlled, predictable, exactly the way I designed it. But inside that silence, something else was building, something I had not accounted for, and I could feel it with every mile we put between us and that alley. I rested my arm against the door, watching the reflection of city lights slide across the glass while my mind moved faster than the car itself, connecting details, pulling at memories I had locked away. And every time I tried to dismiss it, to reduce it to coincidence, to chance, Lily shifted beside me and made it impossible. She was still watching everything, counting exits, noting faces, learning the shape of the world she had just stepped into. And that alone told me more than any answer she could give. You have done this before, I said quietly, not looking at her directly, and she stiffened slightly before answering. What do you mean? Her voice careful again, guarded, running. I clarified, turning my head just enough to catch her expression, hiding, watching, waiting for the right moment to move. She did not respond right away, and in that silence, I got my answer anyway. She had, more than once, more than any child should have to. My mom says it is the only way to stay ahead, she admitted after a moment, her eyes dropping to her hands. She says if you stop paying attention, you lose everything. I almost smiled at that, not because it was amusing, but because it was exactly something Emily would say, something she had said to me once, years ago, when I still believed I could live in two worlds at the same time. I looked away again, jaw tightening slightly as the memory surfaced uninvited, her voice, her eyes, the way she used to look at me like she saw something worth saving, something I eventually proved her wrong about, or at least that is what I told myself when I stood at her grave. Your mother always had strong opinions, I said before I could stop myself, and Lily's head snapped up instantly. You know her? The question came out fast, too fast, hope and fear colliding in a way that made something shift again deep in my chest. I did not answer right away, because answering meant choosing a direction I was not fully ready for. It meant acknowledging that everything I had believed for the past 7 years might have been a lie, and I do not deal in uncertainty, not in my world, not in my life. But silence was not an option anymore, not with her watching me like that, searching for something real. I knew her, I said finally, my voice steady again, controlled, but heavier than before. A long time ago. Lily leaned forward slightly, her entire posture changing, like she had just been given a piece of something she had been missing. Then, you can find her, she said, not asking, not doubting, stating it like a fact, like she had already decided that was how this was going to end. And for a second, I saw it clearly, not just the resemblance in her face, but the way she believed in things without hesitation, the way she pushed forward even when she was afraid, just like Emily used to. And that realization did not bring comfort. It brought something else entirely, something sharper, more dangerous, because if Emily was alive, if she had been alive this whole time, then everything that happened back then, every decision, every loss, every moment I thought I had accepted, meant something different now. "We are going to my house first," I said, shifting my focus back to what I could control, what I could define. "You need somewhere safe, and I need answers." Lily studied me for a second, like she was measuring the weight of my words, deciding if they were enough, before giving a small nod. And that was it. No argument, no hesitation, just quiet trust placed in the wrong man at the right time, or maybe the right man at the worst possible time. I could not tell yet, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty: the past I buried was not gone. It had just been waiting, and now it had found its way back to me through a pair of eyes that looked far too familiar. And this time, walking away was not an option. The gates opened before we reached them, slow and silent, just the way I designed it. No unnecessary noise, no attention drawn. Everything calculated to make sure the world outside never fully understood what existed behind these walls. And as the car rolled through, Lily leaned slightly toward the window, her eyes widening just enough to betray her curiosity, even through the exhaustion she was trying so hard to hide. I noticed everything about her without meaning to: the way her shoulders dropped just a fraction as the tension eased, the way her breathing slowed like her body was finally allowing itself to believe she might be safe, even if her mind was not ready to accept it yet. The car came to a smooth stop in front of the house, lights already on, staff prepared without being told, because they knew better than to ask questions when I arrived unannounced with something unexpected, especially something like this. I stepped out first, the night air cooler here, cleaner, controlled, and for a second I just stood there, looking at the place I had built, the place that was supposed to keep everything in order, everything exactly where it belonged, and I realized how fragile that illusion was becoming. I turned back to the car and opened the door for her myself, ignoring the brief flicker of surprise from the driver, because I do not do that, not for anyone, not anymore. But Lily did not comment on it. She just looked up at me, hesitating for half a second before stepping out, her hand brushing mine again without thinking, like she needed something solid to hold on to even if she did not fully trust it yet. "This is your house?" she asked softly, her voice carrying a mix of awe and caution, and I nodded once, keeping my expression neutral. "For now, it is yours too." The words left my mouth before I could reconsider them, and that alone told me how far this situation had already shifted. She looked at me like she was trying to decide if I meant it, really meant it, and after a second, she gave a small nod, accepting it in the quiet way children sometimes accept things they do not fully understand yet. I guided her inside, the warmth hitting us immediately, soft lighting, polished floors, everything in its place, and yet none of it felt the same with her standing there, small and uncertain in a space built for power and control. A woman approached from the hallway, calm, composed, the kind of presence that did not get shaken easily. "Mr. Voss," she said, stopping just short of us, her eyes flicking briefly to Lily before returning to me. "Waiting, always waiting for direction. Prepare a room," I said without hesitation. "Something comfortable, and bring food. Simple, nothing heavy." She nodded once, already turning to carry out the order without another question. Lily watched the exchange carefully, absorbing the dynamic, understanding more than she should about how this world worked. "You do not ask them, you tell them," she said quietly, not accusing, just observing, and I looked down at her, considering that is how things work here. I replied, and she nodded slowly, like she was filing that away for later, learning the rules of a place she had never expected to enter. I crouched slightly again, bringing myself closer to her level, something I was starting to do without thinking, and that alone unsettled me more than anything else tonight. "You are going to stay here for now," I said, my voice steady, measured. "No one comes in or out without me knowing, you understand?" She nodded again, more certain this time. "My mom said I should listen to people who keep their word," she said, and I felt that same quiet shift inside me, sharper now, more defined, because promises were not something I made lightly, not anymore, not after everything. And yet here I was, making one without saying the words out loud. I straightened slowly, watching as she followed the woman down the hallway, her small figure disappearing into a place that was never meant for someone like her, And I stayed there for a moment longer, alone in the silence I had created, because now that she was safe, now that she was inside these walls, there was only one thing left to face. Emily Carter was alive, and whatever truth she had been hiding for 7 years was about to find its way back to me, whether I was ready for it or not. The house settled into silence the way it always did after midnight, controlled and precise, every sound muted, every movement intentional. But tonight that silence felt different, like it was waiting for something, like it knew the balance had shifted and was not sure how to adjust. I stood in my office with the lights dimmed, the city stretching out beyond the glass in a sea of distant motion, cars moving like signals I did not need to decode, people living lives that never touched mine, and for years that separation had been exactly what I wanted. But now there was a fracture in it, small but undeniable, and it had walked through my front door in the form of a child who carried answers I had buried along with her mother. I rested my hands on the edge of the desk, staring down at nothing in particular while my mind replayed every detail, every word, every look, trying to find the piece that would make this make sense. But there was no simple explanation, not anymore. A soft knock broke the silence, controlled, respectful, and I did not turn as I answered. "Come in." The door opened quietly. One of my most trusted men stepping inside, his posture straight, his expression unreadable, the way I expected it to be. "She is settled," he said, keeping his voice low. "She ate a little, asked for water, and the staff prepared the room as instructed." I nodded once, absorbing that information without looking at him. But he did not leave, which meant there was more. "She asked about you," he added after a second, and that made me turn slightly, just enough to acknowledge it. "What did you tell her?" I asked, my tone neutral, and he hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. "That you are someone who keeps people safe." I held his gaze for a moment, measuring the weight of that answer, because words like that do not belong to men like me, not in the way she would understand them. But I did not correct him. I did not say anything at all, because part of me wanted to believe it, even if I had spent years proving otherwise. "Find everything," I said finally, turning back toward the window. "I want every record, every trace, anything connected to Emily Carter in the last 7 years, hospitals, schools, apartments, aliases if she used them. I do not care how small it seems. Bring it to me." His response was immediate. "Yes, sir." But before he could leave, I added one more thing, something I had not said out loud until now. "And I want to know who has been looking for them." The room shifted slightly at that, not visibly, but I felt it, because that question carried a different kind of weight, not just curiosity, but intent. And he understood that. "Understood," he said, and then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, leaving me alone again with thoughts I could not ignore. I exhaled slowly, running a hand through my hair as I let the truth settle in fully for the first time. Emily was alive. Not just alive, but running, hiding, raising a child who carried pieces of both her past and mine. And she had not come to me. She had not reached out, not once in 7 years, which meant she had a reason strong enough to stay hidden even when everything around her was falling apart. And that realization did not sit well with me, because it meant there was something I did not know, something she believed I could not protect her from. I pushed away from the desk and walked out into the hallway, my steps quiet against the polished floor as I moved without thinking, guided more by instinct than intention, until I found myself standing outside the room where Lily was staying, the door slightly open, light spilling softly into the hallway. I stopped there, not entering, just listening, and after a second I heard it, the faint, steady sound of breathing, calm, even, the kind that only comes when someone finally feels safe enough to rest. And for reasons I did not want to examine too closely, I stayed there a moment longer, making sure it remained that way, because whatever was coming next, whatever answers waited on the other side of this night, one thing had already changed. I was no longer dealing with the past as something finished. I was dealing with it as something alive, something breathing, something sleeping just a few feet away from me. And for the first time in years, I understood that control was not the same as certainty. I do not sleep when something does not make sense, and tonight nothing made sense. Not the girl in the next room, not the name I thought I buried, not the quiet certainty growing in the back of my mind that this was never random. By the time the first light of morning began to cut through the skyline, I was already back in my office, the city below waking up in slow, predictable patterns while mine shifted in ways I could not control. The door opened without a knock this time, which meant only one thing: information. I turned slightly as he stepped in, placing a thin folder on my desk with the kind of precision that told me he understood the weight of what was inside. "It was not easy," he said, his voice low, measured. "She did not exist for most of the past 7 years, no stable records, no consistent identity. She moved often, always just ahead of anything official." I picked up the folder but did not open it immediately because I already knew what it would say in a broader sense. She had been hiding, intentionally, carefully. "And now?" I asked, my tone even, and he nodded once. "Now there is something." That made me look at him fully, because something was all I needed. He slid a single photograph out from the folder and placed it in front of me. And for a second, the room went completely still, not in the physical sense, but in the way everything inside me stopped trying to deny what was right in front of me. Emily stood there, older, sharper around the edges, but unmistakably her. Hair pulled back, her expression alert, protective, and beside her, Lily, smaller, younger, looking up at her with the same trust one had seen just hours ago. I stared at the image longer than I should have, memorizing details I had no right to claim anymore. 3 months ago, he continued, filling in the silence. Small town just outside the city. She kept a low profile, cash only, no digital trail, but she stayed longer than usual. I set the photo down carefully, my fingers still for a second before I pulled back. "Why?" I asked, and his answer came without hesitation. "Because she was working." That caught my attention, not because of what it meant, but because of what it implied. Emily had never been the type to stay still unless she had a reason, a purpose. "What kind of work?" I pressed, and he glanced briefly at the file before answering. "Community clinic, administrative role, nothing that would draw attention. But it gave her access to people, information, a reason to stay without being questioned." I nodded slowly, piecing it together. She had not just been hiding. She had been building something stable enough to risk staying in one place, which meant something had changed, or she thought it had. And then she ran. I said more to myself than to him, and he confirmed it with a quiet, "Yes, sir." I leaned back slightly, my mind already moving ahead, already tracing the line from that photograph to the girl asleep down the hall. Something had forced her to leave. Something had broken whatever safety she thought she had. And instead of disappearing alone, she sent Lily out, toward me, not toward anyone else, not toward the police, not toward friends or strangers, toward me, which meant she knew I would find her, or she wanted me to, and that realization settled in with a clarity that left no room for doubt. This was not an accident. This was a decision. I stood up slowly, the weight of it sharpening my focus instead of clouding it. "Prepare the car," I said, already reaching for my jacket, and he hesitated just enough to acknowledge the shift. "You are going yourself?" I looked at him, not with anger, but with certainty. "She sent her to me," I said, my voice calm, controlled, but carrying something deeper now, something personal. "That means she wants to be found." I walked past him without waiting for a response, my steps steady as I moved down the hallway again. This time not to check if Lily was safe, but because I needed to see her, needed to confirm what I already knew before everything changed again. I stopped outside her door and pushed it open quietly. She was awake now, sitting on the edge of the bed, small hands folded in her lap, like she had been waiting. Her eyes lifted to mine the moment I stepped in, searching, hopeful, and for the first time since this began, I did not hesitate. "We are going to find your mother," I said, and the way her face changed, the way something lit up through the fear she had been carrying all night, told me I was no longer chasing the past. I was stepping directly into it. The drive out of the city felt longer than it should have, not because of the distance, but because of what waited at the end of it. Lily sat beside me in the back seat, quieter now, her earlier fear replaced with something else, something fragile and dangerous: hope. She watched the road like she was trying to recognize it, like she was searching for something familiar in every passing mile marker and gas station sign. And I let the silence stretch between us because I knew better than to interrupt that. Some moments need space to exist, especially the ones that matter. The file sat open on my lap, the photograph still visible, Emily frozen in time 3 months ago. Alive, real, close enough that I could almost hear her voice again if I let myself. But I did not allow that. Not yet, because this was not about memory anymore. This was about truth. Is this the place? Lily asked softly after a while, her voice pulling me back to the present. I glanced up at the road ahead, the exit sign coming into view. Small town, nothing remarkable about it from the outside, which made it exactly the kind of place someone would choose if they wanted to disappear. It is, I answered, my tone steady, and she nodded, pulling her hands tighter into her sleeves as if bracing herself for something she could not name. The car slowed as we turned off the main road, the surroundings shifting from city edges to something quieter, narrower streets, older buildings, the kind of place where people notice strangers but do not ask questions if they are not given a reason to. I stepped out first when the car stopped. The air different here, less controlled, carrying the faint scent of rain from the night before, and for a second I just stood there, looking at the small clinic across the street. The sign simple, almost forgettable, but the moment I saw it, I knew. This was where she had been, where she had built whatever life she thought she could keep hidden. Lily stepped out beside me, her eyes fixed on the building, her breathing a little faster now. Not panic, just anticipation, the kind that comes when something important is just within reach. She worked there, she said quietly, more to herself than to me, and I nodded once, already moving forward. The door opened with a soft chime as we stepped inside. The space was empty except for a single woman behind the front desk. She looked up immediately, her expression shifting from routine politeness to cautious curiosity as she took in the two of us, strangers who did not belong in a place like this. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice careful, measured, and I met her gaze without hesitation. "I am looking for Emily Carter," I said, keeping my tone even, but there was something underneath it now, something that made people listen more closely. Her reaction was subtle but immediate, a flicker of recognition, followed by something else, concern. She glanced briefly at Lily, then back at me, and that was all I needed to confirm it. We were in the right place. "She does not work here anymore," the woman said after a second, her voice quieter now, like she was choosing her words carefully. "She left suddenly." Lily's hand tightened slightly against her sleeve, and I felt it even without looking. "When?" I asked, my focus sharpening, and the woman hesitated, just long enough to tell me this was not simple. "A few days ago," she answered. She seemed worried, kept looking over her shoulder, like she was expecting something. That aligned perfectly with everything I had already pieced together. Something had found her, something had forced her to move before she was ready. And instead of disappearing quietly, she made a decision. She sent Lily out, sent her to me, which meant she believed I was the only option left. I glanced down at Lily then, just for a second, and the way she looked back at me, waiting, trusting, made one thing clear. This was no longer about finding Emily. It was about understanding why she had been running from me all this time. "Did she leave anything?" I asked, turning my attention back to the woman, and after a brief hesitation, she nodded slowly, reaching beneath the desk and pulling out a small envelope. She said if anyone came asking, if it was you, to give you this. The moment the envelope touched my hand, something shifted again, deeper than before, because Emily Carter had not just expected me to find her, she had planned for it. And whatever was inside that envelope was going to change everything. The envelope felt lighter than it should have, like something that carried weight without mass. And for a moment, I just held it in my hand, staring at the way my name was written across the front in a handwriting I had not seen in 7 years, sharp, deliberate, unmistakably hers. Lily shifted slightly beside me, her eyes fixed on it with the same intensity one felt, but for different reasons. For her it was hope. For me it was something far more complicated, something that carried questions I was not sure I wanted answered. But there was no turning back now, not after everything that had already unfolded. I slid my finger under the seal and opened it slowly, careful, controlled, like the act itself required precision. Inside was a single folded letter and a photograph. I recognized the photograph immediately, not because of where it was taken, but because of who was in it. Emily, younger, softer, standing beside me, a moment from a life that no longer existed, a life I had convinced myself was gone. I did not let myself linger on it. Not yet. I unfolded the letter instead, the paper worn slightly at the edges like it had been handled. More than once, and I began to read. If you are holding this, it means everything I tried to prevent has already happened. Her words were exactly as I remembered, clear, direct, never wasting space on things that did not matter. I did not disappear because I stopped caring. I disappeared because I finally understood what your world does to anything it touches, and I was not willing to let it take one more thing from me. I felt something tighten in my chest at that. Not anger, not yet. Something closer to recognition, because she had always seen things in ways I refused to, always understood consequences I chose to ignore. I kept reading, my focus sharpening with every line. I wanted to tell you the truth, more times than I can count, but every time I got close, something happened that reminded me why I could not, why I had to stay hidden, not from you, but from everything around you. Lily leaned closer without realizing it, her small hand brushing against my arm as if grounding herself in something steady. And I did not move away. I did not break the moment, because this was not just my past unfolding anymore. It was hers too. Lily is yours. The words were simple, direct, and they did not feel like a shock, not after everything. They felt like confirmation, like the final piece clicking into place exactly where it belonged. And for a second, everything else faded. The room, the noise, the distance between then and now. All of it reduced to a single truth I could not deny anymore. I exhaled slowly, my hand tightening slightly around the paper before I forced it to relax, forced myself to keep reading. I never told you because I knew what it would mean. I knew you would come for her, protect her in the only way you know how, and that would have painted a target on her back the moment she took her first step into your world. I glanced down at Lily then, really looked at her, not as a mystery, not as a question, but as something far more real, something that carried my name whether I acknowledged it or not. And she was watching me, waiting, her expression open in a way that made everything inside me shift again. If she finds you, it means. I ran out of time. I continued, my voice quieter now, even to my own ears. It means the only chance she has left is you, not the man you became, but the man I believed you could be. I stopped there, the words settling into something heavier than anything that had come before, because Emily had not just trusted me with Lily, she had challenged me. Even now, even after everything, she had placed something in my hands that could not be controlled, could not be negotiated, could not be treated. Like anything else in my world, Lily reached for my hand then, small fingers wrapping around mine without hesitation, and for the first time since this began, I did not question it. I did not pull away. I let it happen, because in that moment, there was only one thing that mattered, not the past, not the mistakes, not the empire I had built to keep everything at a distance, but her, standing beside me, looking at me like I was the answer she had been searching for. And I realized something with a clarity that left no room for doubt. I could control a city, I could shape outcomes, I could make people listen without raising my voice. But this was different. This was not about power. It was about something I had never learned how to be. And as I folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope, I understood that finding Emily was no longer the only goal. Understanding why she believed I could change was just as important, because for the first time in years, someone had not feared what I could do. They had believed in what I might choose not to do, and that was a responsibility I could not ignore.